Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, one God, Amen. Today was a very joyful event at St. Vladimir's Orthodox Theological Seminary, where SVS Press, along with SAC Press, launched the second book in the Coptic Studies series, titled Habib Girgis, Coptic Orthodox Educator and a Light in the Darkness. This is a research project that I've been working on for many, many years, and by mere chance I had discovered a plethora of archival documents underneath the Cathedral of St. Mark in Cairo that added rich information about Habib Girgis and his work in particular in the Sunday school movement and also in theological education. Many reports, many letters that he wrote to the lay community council, to the deputy of the patriarchate, budgets on Sunday schools, his work in village education, which is very fascinating, how he attempted to alleviate illiteracy. He speaks about all of this in this very interesting booklet called Visitation to the Villages. Habib Girgis was a very inspirational figure in our modern Coptic history. He was born in 1876 and fell asleep on the 21st of August 1951. So he lived for about 75 years. He studied at the Great Coptic School for his primary and secondary education, and then was the first person to join the Theological College when it was established by Pope Cyril V in 1893. He excelled in his studies, even though there was no teachers of theology at that time, yet he taught himself theology and began to read in the patriarchal archives, and he himself said that he did not leave any paper unturned or any book or manuscript that he didn't read in those archives, in the patriarchal library, I mean. In his final year as a student, they allowed him to teach first-year students theology because there was no teacher on theology. And when he graduated in March of 1898, he was then appointed to teach at the Theological College. There is much to be said about him. He was an author. He wrote over 30 books. He was the editor-in-chief of the Vine Journal, which was an academic, theological, historical journal, and also wrote many articles in many Coptic newspapers. He was a poet. He wrote several books of hymnology because he saw that through the hymns that he wrote and taught the children in Sunday school, he could teach them much about the doctrine of the church. We are grateful and indebted to him for all of the great work that he did, because if it was not for him, perhaps the church would have taken a completely different direction, or perhaps may have been diminished extensively if it wasn't for his great work. And he always said that education is the first need for the community after bread. One of his other battle cries was that no man should be ordained to the priesthood without having a theological degree. And he said that no doctor or engineer or teacher or judge or lawyer could work in such positions without having the proper qualification. Then when we are dealing with people's souls and their spirits and their eternity, then those looking after them pastorally need to be theologically trained in order to be able to serve their parishioners better. May the intercessions of this great modern saint, who was canonized in 2013 by the Coptic Synod, be with all of you, and glory be to God forever. Amen.
It's my joy on behalf of Father John Baer, the Dean of St. Vladimir's Seminary, and Father Chad Hatfield, the President of St. Vladimir's Seminary, to welcome back His Grace Bishop Suriel, a longtime friend and co-editor of the Coptic series with Father John Baer, which is the Coptic series, which is a joint effort between St. Vladimir's Seminary and St. Athanasius College in Australia. 3 years back, I believe, Bishop Suriel approached St. Vladimir's Seminary about beginning a Coptic study series. And the first book that we published in the series was The Life of Repentance and Purity from Pope Shenouda. And the book, which we released just over 1 year ago, was the fastest selling first print run that we had with St. Vladimir's Press. In 4 short months, or maybe a little under 4 months, between the sales in the United States and the sales in Australia, we sold out of the first print run, which was 6,000 copies, for which we have now are well into the second print run and are pleased with the reception of the work of Pope Shenouda in that series, which was the efforts and translation work of Bishop Suriel. This Coptic Studies series has now expanded to a second volume, which is why we are here today, to learn more about the work of Habib Girgis, a canonized saint in the Coptic Church. Bishop Suriel began his studies in 2005 while he was doing his doctoral work at Fordham University. And now, some years later, after much editing, research, learning from someone who lived in the same building as Habib Girgis, we have the completed book, Habib Girgis, Coptic Orthodox Educator and a Light in the Darkness. Bishop Suriel is no stranger to the United States. He travels often and has been visiting with parishes, bringing the research that he has done to the Coptic communities in the United States, as well as throughout the world. Bishop Suriel's work has come to a completion, and he's with us today to bring to us a presentation entitled The Role of St. Archdeacon Habib Girgis in the Renaissance of the Alexandrian Coptic Church. So please welcome His Grace Bishop Suriel to the podium for his presentation. Thank you.
It is indeed a great joy, a great honor, a great blessing for me to be here again at St. Vladimir's Orthodox Theological Seminary, a place which is very close and dear to my heart, a place that I love so much. It is the leading theological institution for Orthodox studies throughout the world. And I want to thank in particular the Dean, Father John Baer, a very close friend and someone that I liaise with on many matters throughout the year. And recently we had a very important meeting in Amsterdam between 4 theological institutions, St. Vladimir's, St. Athanasius in Melbourne, the Amsterdam Center of Orthodox Theology, and also St. Ignatius Theological Academy in Sweden. And the 4 deans met together to discuss how we can collaborate further, how we can cause the rapprochement between the Eastern and Oriental Orthodox churches, and we hope that much fruit will come out of these 4 Orthodox colleges coming together. I also want to thank the Chancellor, Father Chad. I'm very grateful to all of the amazing staff of SVS Press, because without them this book would not have come to fruition. And in particular, I want to thank Michael Soroka, who began this project with me. I know he's no longer here at SVS Press, but I want to thank in particular Father Ignatius Green, Deacon Gregory Hatrack, who have been working very closely with me, and particularly over the last year, to bring this book finally to fruition. It really makes me very happy today to have this finally in my hand and to see this after a very long journey of studying and knowing more and discovering many things about this inspirational figure at the turn of the 20th century in Egypt. And so I'm deeply indebted to SVS Press and for setting up this Coptic Studies series and for their great assistance in publishing this 2nd volume titled Habib Girgis, Coptic Orthodox Educator and a Light in the Darkness. My presentation today is titled The Role of Saint Archdeacon Habib Girgis in the Renaissance of the Alexandrian Coptic Church. In this presentation, I will attempt to give some snippets or snapshots into the distinguished life and career of a fascinating Coptic leader of the first half of the 20th century and his role in the Coptic Church, and that is Habib Girgis. His Holiness Pope Shenouda III of blessed memory said some timeless words concerning Habib Girgis and his era by saying, "Our teacher, Archdeacon Habib Girgis, pioneer of religious education in our generation, started his life in an age which was almost void of religious education and knowledge. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was on the face of the deep, as the book of Genesis describes. Then God said, 'Let there be light,' and there was light, and the light was Habib Girgis." End of quote. It is a very powerful image that Pope Shenouda III portrays here of Girgis. It is an image of a man who came to bring light to a bleak situation of ignorance and apathy concerning religious and theological education. It was an age where Coptic identity was seriously threatened. That was due to many factors that tore at this very identity. 3 of the most pertinent factors were internal struggles within the church, predominantly between the hierarchy and the lay elite, the pressures from political leaders, and the influence of Western missionaries who attempted to proselytize among the Copts and introduce modern educational philosophies into Egypt beginning in the middle of the 19th century. All these factors were at play at the time of the birth of Habib Girgis and placed Coptic identity at risk. Habib Girgis Mankarios was born at 65 Shari al-Kobesi Bizahir in the suburb of Al-Fajjala in Al-Azbakiyya district of central Cairo. In 1876, his father, Girgis Mankarios, was from the city of Tema in Upper Egypt, and his mother was from Al-Bayadeya. At that time, both cities were part of the Directorate of Jirja and are now part of the Suhaj Governorate. Unfortunately, little is known about Habib's childhood and upbringing, and his own writings mention nothing of that period of his life. We do know that his father worked as a chief clerk in the most important government departments associated with the interior administration during the reign of Khedive Ismail, and he died in 1882 when Habib was only 6 years old. Habib's mother Miriam, who died in 1939, continued raising her 3 sons and her daughter Martha in a Christian manner. She enrolled Habib in the great Coptic school in Cairo, where he excelled and completed both his elementary and secondary schooling. One brother, Ghali, died at a young age, while the other, Kamil, eventually became an employee of the railway authority. There was little written about Girgis's childhood and upbringing, and most writers who wrote about Girgis spoke concerning his theological education and his career. Girgis's own writings do not mention anything about that period of his life, whether in his books or in articles in his journal Al-Karma or the Vine. Girgis was among the first to join the Coptic Theological College since its establishment in 1893, when Yusuf Bek Mankarius was the dean. Being at the top of his class, Girgis was chosen to teach at the Coptic Theological College while in his final year as a student, because there were few instructors to teach theology. He graduated in 1898 and was appointed to teach full-time on the 17th of March that same year. Later, he became the dean of the college in 1918, and in fact, next year will be the centenary of that event. At that point, he had been ordained an archdeacon, but he would never be ordained a priest. Pope Cyril V trusted Girgis and appointed him as his personal archdeacon and disciple. He also worked closely with Pope Ioannis XIX, Pope Macarius III, and Pope Yusef II. Both Copts and Muslims were deeply affected by his death on Wednesday evening, 21 August 1951. The church had lost one of its most revered sons, an eloquent teacher, a visionary, an educational pioneer, and a loyal servant of the Coptic Orthodox Church. His contribution to the church has long been noted, and his pious life was officially recognized on the 20th of June 2013, when the Coptic Orthodox Synod canonized Archdeacon Habib Girgis as a saint of the church. After this brief introduction about Girgis, I would now like to turn my attention to the role of Habib Girgis in reviving the Coptic Church during the first half of the 20th century. Girgis's role was significant in preserving the Coptic Church intact till today. He saw the dismal state that his people had reached, and this led him to present an impressive lecture early in his career on the 2nd of May, 1897, titled Christian Religion, while still a student at the theological college. Girgis attempted to inspire his audience to reflect on their faith and their dismal state of affairs. In Habib Girgis's vision for education, he wanted to reduce illiteracy, ignorance, and apathy among the Coptic community. Girgis believed the Copts could maintain their identity and faith through education. He concentrated his vision for education in several arenas: educating those who would teach, education of children and youth through the Sunday school movement, as well as youth ministry in the churches, education of young men in the theological college to serve as priests or lay ministers, village education, education for women, education of the masses through the important ministry of preaching in the churches, and adult education for tradespeople and workmen on the one hand, and for parents through family scriptural lessons that were published and distributed widely on the other. He devised curricula for each constituency and printed millions of religious pictures that were widely distributed with an explanation of the story on the back of them. Popular education was important, in particular when it came to educating the illiterate, mainly in the villages. Hence, these religious pictures played a significant role, and time is limited to discuss this here. Girgis also gave great importance to having the Christian religion taught to Christian students in government schools, as well as in Coptic schools. And part of his educational vision was to have a complete census of the Coptic community in Egypt and Sudan, and what regions they lived, in order to have an idea of what services were required for them. That was evident through the many forms that Girgis designed to gather statistical and other information. The results of those statistics were published regularly to the Coptic community in the form of a report. Habib Girgis believed that in order to educate, a well-structured administration system was necessary. He gave great attention to implementing such a system for the Sunday school movement, which he was instrumental in establishing, as well as his work at the Theological College. He prepared many detailed forms, in particular for administrating the Sunday school movement. Those forms were required to be completed regularly by the Sunday school teachers in each parish, in addition to the coordinators of Sunday schools, and they were checked and signed off by the parish priest. The establishment and success of the Sunday school movement, which flourishes even today in the Coptic Orthodox Church, are attributable largely to the work of Habib Girgis. While still a student at the Coptic Orthodox Seminary in Cairo, Girgis realized that children were the key to the revival of the church. Not only had generations of young Copts been deprived of a sound education in their faith, but they were the most vulnerable to conversion to competing religions. Girgis's community was mired in illiteracy, ignorance, and apathy. He decided to attack this problem head-on, and as in the case of most of his conquests, he chose education as his weapon. He began informally by gathering local children on Sundays at various churches and societies in Cairo, beginning with the Church of the Virgin Mary in the middle-class suburb of El-Fajala. He taught these young people about the Bible, the Coptic rites, church history, and the lives of Egyptian saints and martyrs. Since the mid-19th century, Western missions in Egypt had begun running Sabbath schools to attract and teach youthful converts from other faiths. The American Presbyterian Mission was the first, followed by other Protestant denominations and the Roman Catholics. In 1870, there were 236 Sabbath school pupils, a number that increased to 658 in 1875, then 1,494 in 1880, and then in a huge leap to 4,438 in 1887. The majority of these pupils were Copts, a fact that troubled the Coptic Church hierarchy. They felt threatened by the development of a religious educational activity imposed by foreigners and taking place right in front of them, but they had little ability or means to react. These Sabbath schools used methods specially designed to appeal to children, such as distributing attractive religious pictures, reading from illustrated books, and teaching tenets of the faith through the dynamic question and answer method known as catechism. In order to compete with these Sabbath schools, Girgis decided to emulate them. He wrote a Coptic catechism, which was published in a series of 4 books in 1898, and the popularity of his classes continued to grow. At this time, the Coptic hierarchy was starting to take action in the field, and no doubt this inspired Girgis in his work. In 1898, the Holy Synod issued its decree on the necessity of Christian education for school children, and the following year, Pope Carolus V acknowledged the Church's responsibility to provide Christian education to the young. Then in 1903, the third decree was issued from the Holy Synod on 4 major concerns that had a strong bearing on Girgis's work. The first was the imperative to implant Christian education among Coptic children from a young age, and to spread rigorous religious values among the Copts so that they would live upright lives to benefit themselves, their families, and the nation as a whole. The second concern advocated religious education in Coptic schools and the rearing of Coptic Orthodox children through attendance at Sunday liturgies and other general worship services. Third, attention was given to the compulsory teaching of Coptic history and faith in all Coptic schools and in the Kutab system, which was a rote learning method before proper schools were introduced. Fourth, lessons were to be based on Coptic Orthodox principles and school books to be approved by a religious education committee based at the Patriarchate. All teachers and students at Coptic schools were obliged to attend weekly church services, while the parents of Coptic children enrolled in state schools were obliged to take their sons and daughters to church regularly. Meanwhile, the Sunday school system had been blossoming. In November 1907, Pope Carolus V issued a comprehensive letter to the pastors and teachers of Sunday schools, stressing the importance of children's education. It included advice and counsel on the care and righteous upbringing of children who constituted the nation of tomorrow and the congregation of the future church. Girgis took this as further encouragement, realizing that the hierarchy of the church at its highest levels now gave priority to the religious education of the young. He took full advantage of the opportunities that this brought. Pope Cyril V, probably acting on a suggestion offered to him by Girgis during one of their regular weekly discussions, decided in 1918 to form a general committee to oversee the religious education offered to state school students on Fridays and to Coptic school students on Sundays. The committee had 10 members, including Girgis, and was headquartered at the seminary. Branches were set up throughout Egypt, including Alexandria, Damanhur, West Burma, Mansoura, Fayoum, Manfalut, and many other places. Basing the formative work of the Sunday schools at the seminary was a strategic move on Girgis's part. The seminary was the heart of education in the church, the place where future Coptic leaders, priests, deacons, and lay leaders were formed. It thus became an ideal laboratory where Girgis could test his ideas and theories on the faculty and students. The seminary's intellectual environment fostered the publications and research needed to develop sound pedagogical methods, textbooks, and curricula, setting the right tone for this vital work of educating the young. Educational materials introduced by the Western missionaries, such as religious pictures and illustrated books, became central to Girgis's method. The Americans and other Protestant missionaries in the second half of the 19th century were supplied with books and tracts from the CMS press in Malta. As early as the 1820s, these were being given free to school children in Cairo, who received them eagerly. Titles distributed in Egypt by the Malta Press included scripture stories, Watt's Catechism, the Bible Catechism, and Companion to the Bible. No printed Coptic Orthodox educational resources for children existed at Girgis's time, so he may have drawn upon this foreign material when writing his catechism for grades 1 to 4, published in 1899, titled The Doctrines of the Coptic Orthodox Faith, a Foundational Synopsis. There is ample evidence to prove that Girgis heavily utilized literature from abroad in his teaching, though he made sure he adapted this material to suit the Orthodox faith. Girgis began moving in an expansive way to ensure that religious education spread beyond Cairo, to every church and society in Egypt, and even into Sudan and Ethiopia. Branches of the Sunday school movement were established in each Egyptian parish and its surrounding villages and towns, all under the leadership of the local parish priest. This governance arrangement was a significant asset to the movement, since it meant that Sunday schools were an activity the priests controlled, rather than one that challenged their authority. Because the Sunday school movement was not led by the better educated urban non-clerics, it was not perceived as a threat by the priests. At each church, a Sunday school was established, while in each city, a Coptic youth league was set up. The league had branches in every church and brought members together on a regular basis to discuss general strategies. Girgis prepared support materials for teachers that were published and distributed in 6 volumes, titled Educational Studies for Teachers of Coptic Orthodox Sunday Schools. In their entirety, these volumes address teachers of children from infancy until 13 years of age, describing how lessons should be prepared on a solid pedagogical and psychological foundation. As such, the books tell us much about Girgis's educational philosophy and pedagogical views. Volume 6, for example, targets children aged 10 to 13 and is divided into 4 sections. The first outlines the most important characteristics of children of this age group. The second discusses methods of teaching them. The third describes the most important skills that teachers need for effective teaching. And the fourth has questions for reviewing the material presented. Girgis notes that children aged 10 to 13 dislike interacting with younger children, and that from age 11 on, they begin to develop rapidly. He also states that any principle that crystallizes in a child's mind at this age will remain with him or her for a long time. For this reason, such children should be immersed in an atmosphere conducive to correct thinking, so that they might become self-reliant and able to make sound judgments. Girgis continues by citing a further 20 characteristics of children in this age group. His ideas draw upon the Christian message and Coptic heritage, as well as Western models of education. He advocates a holistic view of child development. He says this: teaching is neither the dictation of advice, nor of orders, nor of instruction, Rather, it is the participation between the teacher and the child in a common spirit for knowledge. This is back over 100 years ago that Habib Girgis is saying this. Such pedagogical views stem from those of 19th century German educator Friedrich Froebel, dubbed the inventor of the kindergarten, who championed child-centered education. Like Froebel, Girgis wanted children to see themselves as part of the unity of the world and encouraged teachers to help youngsters develop self-determination and freedom. Girgis also insisted that teachers inspire children to meet their own needs and establish their own identities. We know that Girgis was aware of Froebel's work, for he mentioned him in his writings. This example gives us a glimpse into how Girgis drew upon the theories of Western thinkers and educators to give Coptic Sunday school teachers a modern educational philosophy crystallized in Arabic that they could implement in their classes if they heeded his advice. Habib Girgis was familiar with various strategies for religious education, including debates, catechism, self-directed learning, pantomime, storytelling, excursions, handicrafts, and self-directed research or projects. Poetry and hymnology also played an important role. Girgis believed that he could teach the central beliefs of the Coptic faith to children through hymns that he wrote himself. He also favored the use of hymns because they were part of the Orthodox tradition that he strived to preserve. For example, the hymnology of the Midnight Praise of the Coptic Church defends the Orthodox teaching that Saint Mary is the Mother of God, the Theotokos, a belief that Nestorius denied in the Third Ecumenical Council of Ephesus in 431 AD, and for which he was excommunicated. Thus, in Girgis's hymn books, we find hymns containing various teachings concerning the saints, the sacraments, the Trinity, the incarnation of the Logos, the virtues, and the Ten Commandments, as well as hymns particular to Saint Mary, the Apostles, fasting, the Creed, church history, and even Sunday school, to name a few. Habib Girgis's use of hymnology served two purposes. It was educational, and it helped preserve Coptic musical heritage. In his book, A Key to the Tunes for Orthodox Hymns, Girgis lists the Coptic melodies to which he set his hymn texts. Each text could be sung to a number of different melodies according to the season of the liturgical calendar. This meant that the hymns were versatile and mostly timeless, since the words could be sung repeatedly throughout each year. Girgis understood that unless he used Coptic music rather than the Western church music then being introduced to Egypt by Catholic and Protestant missionaries, much of the Coptic musical heritage and tradition would have been lost. Despite the many early obstacles, Girgis's efforts ultimately brought success to the Sunday school movement. The handful of Sunday schools that he had set up at the outset of his mission at the turn of the 20th century had by the end of his life grown to more than 650 branches, offering 2,100 classes across all of Egypt, Sudan, and the Wahad, with 43,000 children being educated by 2,500 teachers and assistants. In 1948, he wrote, saying, "These days, we are no longer in need to write about the importance of Sunday school to the church. Its practical effects in the lives of the children and the teachers have become manifest. Its spirit and principles have nourished homes immensely. Fathers and mothers have felt its value in the lives of their children. Parents have loved it, for it has also influenced their lives in an indirect way. Children have imparted the message of life to their parents. End of quote. The time in which we exerted, he continues saying, the time in which we exerted every effort to convince our fathers, the bishops and priests of the importance of Sunday schools has passed. Now, not only do we see them encouraging it, but requesting its expansion in all the cities and villages in their diocese. Every priest desires to have a Sunday school in his parish. Sunday schools did not reach this stage except after the clergyman trusted in it when it proved itself to be one of the members of the church. It is, in fact, among its most important members. Being in the bosom of the church allows it to develop and thrive, and from its milk one can drink and learn. One may grasp its laws and traditions and remain firm. End of quote. From his early years, Habib Girgis held a firm conviction that the Coptic Church was in dire need of a seminary. In Girgis's writings, he wanted to impress upon his readers the importance of the theological reforms that he had begun and to encourage them to support that fundamental ministry, which he hoped would lead to a better future for the Copts. And as Botros Basha Ghali reminded the Copts, a training school for priests was of fundamental importance. He said, "Be concerned for the clerical school or the theological school before any other institution. For if all your Coptic schools close down, you can find an alternative to them in the other schools. But if you do not have the theological school, where will you train your pastors?" By the end of the 19th, Girgis would later quote these words on several occasions. By the end of the 19th century, the Coptic Church urgently needed a seminary for the formation of priests. Girgis could not imagine a priest serving without the education necessary to equip him for such an important role. He understood how impossible it would be for any person to be employed in a profession or trade without proper training. How much more important was this for a priest who was responsible for people's souls? And this is what he said. But the church cannot present to us true leaders, counselors, and reformers unless her leaders and pastors are specially trained to practice their lofty and critical roles. Who can be compared to them except those with similar critical positions in life? An engineer cannot take on this role without proper training in the faculty of engineering. The physician cannot be trusted over people's bodies and souls unless he receives both theoretical and practical education in his faculty. The situation is similar also for a judge, lawyer, teacher, farmer, and mechanic, as well as others who are comparable. Hence, a religious pastor is not exempt from this, since a pastor worthy of this title and worthy to be responsible for souls needs to be educated in religious and secular subjects. But it is more important that the priest perfect the sacraments and characteristics of his profession than any of those other professions, so that he may fulfill his obligations and carry out his burdens. In this way, he may transcend to a most eminent relationship with the eternal souls he cares for. End of quote. Girgis compared the relationship between the seminary and the Coptic community to that between the heart and the body. He says, "For as the duty of the heart is to pump blood to the organs of the body, accordingly, from this spring, the spirit of teaching, guidance, and the transmission of the good news of salvation will spread among people." End of quote. The mission of the seminary was twofold: to teach Orthodox theology and doctrine, and to form priests and preachers who would enlighten members of the Coptic community, both young and old. Preaching was also important to the project of revitalizing Coptic culture and identity in the broader sense. Over many centuries, the Coptic language had slowly withered away in favor of Egyptian Arabic. By Girgis's time, only a meager number spoke Coptic fluently, and among these, only a few were literate in the language. Reawakening a love for the Coptic language became part of the seminary's mission and an important step toward reclaiming Coptic identity. Girgis wrote, "A long time has passed over the Coptic language while it was abandoned, subdued, and shut off from speech and circulation among the Coptic community. The first to show affection toward the Coptic language and rescue it, loosen its bonds and bring it to life, was the clerical school, which revived it and breathed from its spirit into it, and worked towards its promulgation among individuals, families, and the entire community." End of quote. The seminary's first lecturer in the Coptic language was the scholar Ecladius Bek Labib, who went on to publish the most comprehensive Coptic Arabic dictionary of its day. Labib taught the language to his own family, encouraged his students to learn all aspects of it, including its grammar and literature. When Girgis became dean in 1918, he inherited an institution with virtually no organizational structure, vision, or sense of direction. The curriculum was inadequate in many ways, particularly with regard to religious and theological education, the very purpose for which the seminary had been established. Financial constraints led to friction between Girgis and the lay community council, the Majlis al-Melli, and Girgis felt stymied in his efforts to improve the seminary's infrastructure, increase faculty salaries, meet daily running expenses, and much more. Girgis, ever resourceful, devised plans to overcome each obstacle that he met along the path. His progress was sometimes bright and at other times full of thorns and pain. But his goal for the seminary was always clear. He wanted it to render an important service to the church and the community by preparing young men for the priesthood. He also wished to educate those with a monastic vocation, for some of them would eventually become bishops, members of the synod, and leaders of the church. Indeed, one such student, Nazir Gayyid, would become Pope Shenouda III, the 117th Pope of Alexandria and Patriarch of the See of St. Mark, who reigned from 1971 until his falling asleep in 2012. Another important goal was teaching the students to preach. Girgis, a brilliant and convincing preacher, in 1916 delivered an important lecture on the subject at the Coptic Orthodox Society of Faith, which he titled "The History of Preaching and Its Importance in the Christian Church generally and in the Coptic Church specifically." The society printed the sermon and sold it to the public with the proceeds donated by Girgis to the society, so that seminarians would serve the wider community while gaining first-hand experience at preaching. Girgis eventually sent more than 100 students to preach in parishes throughout Cairo and in several other governorates and dioceses elsewhere in Egypt. In this way, education was not dispensed within an ivory tower, but became integral to the life of the community. And this is what Girgis remarked. This light of preaching had a great effect, for the clerical school filled the churches with preaching and counseling. It used the pulpits for the word of God after they had remained empty with no preachers for a long time. As for now, the seminary has graduated those who have loved the pulpits, shaken them, and enlivened preaching, and hence benefited the people as well as spread the doctrine. They abundantly filled the remote districts with their preaching and knowledge after the community had been deprived of knowing their faith, and thus led them to the word of salvation." End of quote. As dean of the seminary, Girgis had his work cut out for him. He took on a monumental list of reforms under dire circumstances, embracing a task that might have discouraged the most formidable and talented of educators. He was fully aware of the immense responsibility placed on his shoulders, later recalling, "In truth, I felt my weakness in front of this precious trust with which His Holiness the Pope entrusted me. I also felt my weakness in front of this heavy and exhausting burden. What encouraged me is that I am a son of this school and one of the most loving and enthusiastic individuals towards it, and the one most desiring to see its renaissance and progress. So I have borne the burden willingly, while remembering the Lord's saying, 'For power is made perfect in weakness.' I consecrated my life for its service, sacrificing every effort in serving the church and the seminary. I relied on God, who said to his servant Paul, 'My grace is sufficient for you,' and on the support of the great Pope and the loyal sons of the community." End of quote. Girgis described his love for the seminary and his zeal for educational and theological reform in strong metaphorical language, likening it to the shedding of blood, putting one's life and spirit at its service, and the kindling of fire and hope in one's heart. This is what he concluded. I felt a voice calling me from the depth of my heart. My soul is ignited, moving to rise up to the duty toward the seminary, for which God created me. For I was created for its sake. Hence, I did not rest for one instant, nor did I become tepid for 1 second, nor did I slacken from working for its progress. This was an inner voice and call, a desired hope, a deep love, and a definite desire, he says. Girgis appointed foreign lecturers to teach subjects for which no qualified Coptic teachers could be found. For instance, in October of 1928, he announced that the seminary's elite group of instructors of theology, the humanities, and law had been joined by the Honorable Mr. John Leonard Wilson, who held a higher degree in theology from Oxford University, to teach philosophy and religion. This was a surprising move, given that Carolus V's previous refusal to permit 2 non-Coptic lecturers to teach theology, but might be explained by the fact that the appointment took place during a vacancy of the papal throne. Pope Ioannis XIX was not to begin his incumbency until December 16, 1928, and Wilson signed his contract on October 1. In his letter of application, Wilson stated, "I respect the doctrines and creeds of the Coptic Church and will undertake not to attempt to confute such doctrines or to establish any other in any way." He was granted the generous salary of 40 Egyptian pounds per month, more than twice the wage of the local faculty members, for an initial 1-year contract. Girgis understood that appointing a highly credentialed scholar from Oxford would help raise both academic standards and the prestige of the seminary. While he did not allow non-orthodox doctrine to be taught to his students, Girgis looked beyond dogma to the other benefits that such a scholar could bring. He also employed foreign teachers of French, English, and Greek, while appointing rabbis to teach Hebrew and imams to teach Arabic. Meanwhile, there were great arguments over whether or not to send some students to study at an Anglican seminary in Britain. And this had been suggested by several members of the lay community council. But after lengthy discussion, the proposal was rejected by the synod, in yet another example of the existing tensions over authority and power between the laity and the church hierarchy. For much of the seminary's history, course content was vague, with no formalized description of what would be taught in each subject. Indeed, it appeared at times that much of the work was done on a piecemeal basis, rather than following a master plan. The library lacked essential academic resources because of constant funding shortfalls. Most of the faculty was academically weak, and there was a continual struggle to find suitably qualified lecturers. Girgis was forced to call on experts from outside the Coptic community to teach subjects such as Hebrew, English, Arabic, and even philosophy of religion. On this point, there was conflict between the lay community council, who wanted to engage teachers from Protestant and other denominations, and the church hierarchy, who vehemently opposed this view. Girgis was caught between the two. He wanted to attract highly trained scholars from other denominations in order to raise the standard of his school, but at the same time, he was concerned about any negativity that might come his way from such a move. In addition, of course, to his wariness of the threat of non-Orthodox teaching affecting the faith of his students. Similarly, while Girgis wanted to raise the professional standards of existing faculty members, there were valid objections to sending them to study abroad as a means of improving their qualification, lest they be overly influenced by Western attitudes. Girgis also faced personal accusations of impropriety, met with resistance to change from various quarters, and suffered a lack of financial support for improvements and reform, including the dreams he nurtured of significantly expanding and improving the seminary's physical facilities. The seminary was never financially viable and was always struggling to cover its debts. Girgis claimed success for the seminary while at the same time accusing those who should have been supporting it, that is the Coptic laity and clergy, of failing to rally around and work in unison. He says this: "Yes, the clerical school fulfilled its mission and continues to do so to the full extent. It is the only lamp that shines in the gloomy darkness that is the predominance of ignorance. It annihilated much of the ignorance of the ignorant and of blind deviation as much as possible, according to the means and motives at hand. If you desire more from it, then strengthen those means, increase such motives, and do not cut them off, so that you do not quench the light of God with your own hands." There is no doubt that Girgis was successful in making Copts think seriously about reform, and that he instigated a reform process. Thanks to his work in the fields of education, publishing, and preaching, many people were inspired by his vision. Although one can sense through his writings the bitterness he felt at the end of his life because his goals were not fully met, at the same time, he hoped for a brighter future, one in which the next generation would carry on his legacy, recognize the central role that his educational reform policies would play in preserving Coptic identity, and assure a successful future for the Coptic community. Girgis's desire was that the Coptic Orthodox Seminary not only graduate priests, preachers, and teachers, but also reformers in every sense of the word. How can we evaluate then the long-term legacy of the dedicated work of Habib Girgis to conclude? The seminary that flourished under his guidance is still in operation today. Its most influential leader since the time of Girgis was Pope Shenouda III of blessed memory. In 1962, Shenouda, then Father Antonios Suriel, was ordained as Bishop of Theological Education, and one of his main duties was to oversee the seminary. Today it is headed by Pope Tawadros II. Located at the Patriarchate in Cairo, it is open to both women and men for theological study. But Girgis's dream that the seminary reach the highest academic standard still has not been fulfilled. And although the seminary does train aspiring priests, a theological education is not yet a compulsory prerequisite for ordination. And we really need to go and study this legacy of Habib Girgis, and if we don't realize this, it will be to our detriment. Sunday schools continue to prosper, both in Egypt and in other countries to which Copts have emigrated. The schools follow a different administrative structure from that devised by Girgis, for each school is now independently run. Curricula continue to be developed in various regions of Egypt, North America, and Australia, and a new unified curriculum in Arabic is currently being implemented. The Coptic Youth League is known today as the Bishopric of Youth Affairs. I'm hoping that this is my next research project, to study the amazing work of Bishop Musa and what has happened in the Bishopric of Youth in the past 40 years. I think will be a fascinating study, and I just got approval from Bishop Musa to begin this research project. In 1980, Pope Shenouda III ordained the first Bishop of Youth, Bishop Musa, who continues to lead a vibrant and successful Coptic youth ministry across the globe. The Bishopric of Youth Affairs continues to take the holistic approach fostered by Habib Girgis, whose philosophy is reflected in his many successful conventions, leadership courses, and publications. Annual international competitions with participants now totaling almost 1 million, including events and activities involving spirituality, faith, doctrine, sports, drama, music, theater, and a wide variety of arts. The Bishopric of Youth also serves young women, with some 40 consecrated deaconesses fulfilling this role in Egypt. One of Habib Girgis's disciples, Murad Wahba, sums up Girgis's life as follows. He says, "The great teacher has failed in his reform, but he failed where shortcoming and failure are considered an honor. It was the failure of a martyr." This is what he said. The Copts take great historical pride in their martyrs. Even their failures, so to speak, are a source of strength and courage. Girgis had a clear goal and vision to make the Coptic Orthodox Seminary rise to the highest international standards of the day. One can feel his heartache, pain, and struggles that he had not achieved his goal despite doing everything within his power to succeed. There is a sense of sadness in his expressions of hope that the next generation would continue the effort and bring his work to fruition. However, Girgis sums up his life's work at the seminary with words that are nevertheless inspirational, revealing inner strength and a passion for education and self-sacrifice despite the hardships and failures, that he and his community endured. And this is the last quote from him. Despite efforts that sapped my health and crushed my strength, I did not surrender for one day to anyone who resisted or envied me. This is a great grace that I do not deserve, as one cannot be envious or resistant except the one who does not have grace. Stones are thrown only at the trees that are filled with fruits, and birds peck only at ripe fruits. I thank God Almighty that through His grace, despair never penetrated my soul for even one day, but in fact I constantly smile at the resistances. I have forgiven and will continue to forgive from the depth of my heart everyone who desires to be my enemy in vain, knowing that it is inevitable that obstacles will come along the path of those who desire to serve God and people. It is inevitable that there is no honey without the bee's sting, and he who abandons positive work for the sake of the murmurings of people resembles the horse that bolts when it sees its own shadow. Gold does not lose its value if it is rejected by animals, and the sun is not blemished if you cannot see it one day. It is imperative that we do not fail in doing good, for we shall reap the harvest in due time. If we do not weary, do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. In fact, while historians consider Pope Cyril IV to be the father of Coptic reform, Habib Girgis should be considered the father of education, both religious and theological, in the modern Coptic era. Moreover, he is to be regarded as the educational administrator par excellence of his time. This is evident through the efforts that Girgis exerted at the Coptic Theological College, through the statutes that he designed to run the college in 1912, through his efforts as dean to operate the theological college on sound administrative principles, as well as through his organizing of the Sunday school movement. There is no doubt that Habib Girgis played a significant role in the renaissance of the Coptic Church during the first half of the 20th century. And perhaps if it were not for his zeal and dedication to his work, the Coptic Church may have dwindled or taken a completely different path. We cannot ignore the significance of his contribution to the renaissance of the Coptic Church, and much more research is required to understand the legacy that he has left behind, and the Coptic Church needs to consider carefully its future by studying and benefiting from Habib Girgis's vision and legacy. Thank you so much for your attention.
I want to thank His Grace for inviting me to participate and share in this wonderful occasion. You know that Archdeacon Habib Girgis has been canonized in our church in 2013. So now he is a saint in our church. And he's a very unique saint. People were very glad to receive the news about his canonization, because he's a very unique type of a saint. When we think of saints, we think of miracles that they performed, etc. But to canonize someone solely on the account of his life and his accomplishments is a new way of thinking of what a saint is. So you're not a saint because you perform miracles. You're a saint because your life with the Lord and what you have done for the kingdom of God here on earth. When we think about Saint Habib Girgis, we think about how much one man can do, one person. Can you imagine? And he was not a patriarch or a bishop or even a priest. He was just a deacon or an archdeacon. But he was faithful in his ministry. If we are faithful in our ministry, we can accomplish a lot. He had a very strong vision. He never complained like many people to complain about many negativities, but he was always positive to do something about the existing negativities. And he was very patient. Took him many years to accomplish what he has accomplished. So he had a vision, and he was very patient, and also he had a lot of resistances, but he overcame everything by God's grace. I don't know how His Grace Bishop Suriel finds time to do all this work and these researches, and is embarking on a new project now, which is very important, but well, I'm inspired by your grace and by all the work that he has done with all the pastoral and administrative responsibilities of the bishop. He still finds time to benefit us all with all this kind of research. Thank you, Your Grace. It's a blessing to have you with us. We thank St. Vladimir's administration for organizing this day. God bless you all. Glory be to God for that.
Small presentation to make. All the photos in the photo exhibition are actually all included in the book, so you can see them all in there. But again, I'm deeply indebted to this blessed seminary, which I love so much, and to the Dean and the Chancellor, and in particular to the staff of SVS Press, to Father Ignatius Green, and to Deacon Gregory, who have put up with me with hundreds of emails to and fro for many months until we finally reach this day. So on behalf of St. Athanasius Coptic Orthodox Theological College in Melbourne, I'd like to present to this seminary, I'd like to present to Deacon Gregory this icon that was especially painted of Saint Archdeacon Habib Girgis that I would like to present to him. Perhaps they may want to put it in the Coptic chapel, and it says, presented to St. Vladimir's Orthodox Theological Seminary community on the occasion of the book launch of Habib Girgis, Coptic Orthodox educator and a light in the darkness.
Thank you, Your Grace. We will be sure, I will be sure to pass this on and your words to the press staff that are traveling today, as well as to our President and Dean who are traveling as well. Both are representing the seminary. Father John is abroad in Moscow right now, and Father Chad is in San Francisco attending the ordination of an archdeacon today to the priesthood of a past employee of St. Vladimir's. Thank you very much.